Hello and welcome to the Shared Practices podcast. I'm so excited. This is exactly what I was hoping to get out of season 5, which is real specific, almost practice underwater like calls with people who struggle with certain leadership situations, conversations that they need to have with team members. So we have someone who emailed us in and said, I have a team member that I'm struggling with. There's actually two doctors, and you'll hear them here on the call. And it's you'll hear in a minute. It's a conversation they were dreading having. And so we had Murray Lowe on the call and he talks us through this, and we talk through the various aspects of having this conversation and dealing with this issue. So without me spoiling too much, I'm just so excited. I'm giddy. I just finished this interview like minutes ago, and I'm so excited for you to hear it. Here we go with the Shared Practices podcast. Welcome to the Shared Practices podcast. We have another really specific application of this season here in today's episode that I'm super excited for, because this is what I was hoping for out of season 5, was the chance to apply leadership skills and data and apply this in your office and become a better leader. So first off, I have with me today my co-host Murray Lowe. How's it going, Murray?
Doing great. Good to be back.
Thanks for being here. And this came straight from what you brought up in an episode. You said, hey, 360 reviews are one of the only ways to gather true data about your leadership skills and how your team is doing and how you're perceived. Because otherwise, if someone just says like, oh, I'm a good leader or I'm a bad leader, you don't even know, talking with someone, what they say and how they act on a day-to-day basis and how they're perceived are completely different. Am I saying that right?
Well, yeah, I made the assertion. We're going to check in with Jack to see if that's true, to see what his perspective on that. I believe it is, and I've worked with enough people over the years to see that. Any improvement begins with valid data, and all data is skewed unless it's anonymous.
Okay, so this is great. We had a listener, Dr. Jack, reach out to us and email and say, hey, I want to do a 360 review. I'm taking this to heart. I want to apply this. And we now have Dr. Jack on the show. So welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
Yeah, this is great. This is exciting. So this is also something that can be a little bit terrifying, to create this survey and open this up to your team. And in fact, one of my favorite podcasts, the 10% Happier podcast, the host of that show did a 360 review with a coach, and he kind of had like PTSD from it. He had he went through stages of shock, grief, and he still brings it up. I mean, in this is like a year later, it still comes up on his show. When he did this 360 review. So this is impressive that you were excited and willing to do something like this. Explain to us what the desire for you came from to even go about this process.
Yeah, so my desire came from just feeling like maybe because we frequently have check-ins with all the team members, and I just felt like when I'd ask them questions, how are things going? What do you feel culture's like? How are we doing as a leadership? I got very generic answers. People that didn't really
thumbs up, boss.
Exactly. Like, yeah, everything's going great. You're doing awesome. And I thought, well, I could see maybe some hesitation in body language. And so when I heard the podcast episode on a 360-degree survey, I thought, this is great. This is what we need, because people can be anonymous. They can really share what they want. And it's funny how you mentioned PTSD, because literally after receiving all the results and looking through them, I went to my wife and I thought, I'm a failure as a leader. Like, what's going on?
You have great data, Jack. Why do you think you're a failure? Your data is pretty darn good. So why do you think
and we'll get to that. But I think there's this natural tendency to absolutely hook on to the things that are in any way, shape, or form negative. So you can have like 8 or 9 great things, and then that one like thing, especially when it's specific and personal, which the 360 review allows specific and personal,
right.
It hits where it hurts like the most. It's like a gut punch to like, oh, that's the kidney. Like you got me. Is that true?
It is. It's true. And that's what's so funny about it is there were 1 to 2 areas in the comments section of what we could improve on that really kind of was a gut punch. And my wife asked me one night, because this was maybe like a 2 or 3 day process where every night we would be getting ready for bed and it would just be consuming my mind. And finally she said, well, why did you even ask them then? and that's when the switch started to turn, and I got back to my clarity of, you're right. Nice. I asked them so that I could learn ways to improve, and they were honest.
And it's a painful process improving.
And can I jump in here too, because I work with leaders and executives all the time, and usually I am with them as they get their feedback. So typically, for you to do this and to receive the feedback without having a coach in the moment guiding you is pretty darn courageous. It's pretty gutsy for you to want to do that. And because what I do when I work with people and leaders is I prepare them to receive it and kind of say, this is not who you are, and this is not about success and failure, and this is just a picture at a moment in time. And I describe it like, like a downhill skier. Sometimes the picture is blurry and it's fuzzy.
Oh, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say thank you. Looking back, it would have been nice to have someone that knew the process to kind of bring me down and back to a calmer state. So.
Sure.
Yeah, at least so you weren't ready to jump off a cliff or something like that, right? Talk you off the ledge, right?
Exactly.
Well, let's take a few steps back here. So I want to give listeners some context to your practice situation. So you're practicing in the Midwest. When did you buy this practice? How long have you been a dentist? And what sort of experience did you have before taking on this leadership challenge of buying and running a dental practice?
Sure. So I've been a dentist for 9 years now. And for the first 6, I was in the military, and I took I took a scholarship, did a 2-year comprehensive dentistry residency. And
there we go.
I loved dentistry, and I also loved the military, but there came a point where I realized that if I wanted to continue in the military, I would have to take more of an administrative role. And my love was being chairside. And so around year 4 of my commitment, I really started opening up my search to find certain practices that I could potentially see myself in for the rest of my career. And I did find one, and it was through a friend. And so it was the opportunity to become an owner immediately, and to also have a couple partners that already had experience in running dental practices. And also, as part of that, I was able to buy into the friend's practice as well, and to see that well-oiled machine running. And so we jumped in, my wife and I talked, and we said, yeah, this is the great opportunity. It's where we want to be. And we left the Army. That was one of the scariest probably days of my life. I was thinking, okay, so
yeah,
I took some terminal leave, and I thought, okay, I've got a little buffer here, but after that, there's no more guaranteed paycheck.
Guaranteed paycheck.
Exactly. Yeah. And so we came to the practice, and for a while we were working on getting some financing for the practice. And so I was an associate in my main practice for a while. And then a few months later, the transition happened. And that's when I realized that the leadership that I thought that I had needed to get some improvement. And so I've been in practice now, in private practice, for a few years, but those first 6 months were the school of hard knocks, basically.
Okay.
I realized many things. I realized a lot that I needed to improve just myself. And so I started to read a lot of books on just personal development, read a lot of books on leadership, listen to a lot of podcasts. And I realized, especially listening back to the leadership episode that you did with Murray, I realized that there were many mistakes I made along the way as well. And I think one of them was comparing the practice that my friend had to my practice, and realizing that my beginning shouldn't be his middle, right? And I love the phrase comparison is the thief of joy, because I think that's exactly what was going on there. I was comparing where they were at and saying, why aren't we there yet? And almost developing a sense of urgency and we need to change this now. And I
panic, maybe a little bit, like not true panic, but like this like tightness in your chest of like, we gotta change something around here.
Exactly. And so I would bring that to work and to my leadership. And I noticed that in general, I feel like I'm a pretty calm guy, but I would notice that I would be a lot shorter, a lot more tense. And so it took realizing that I needed to change that. And so I just got really clear on what my vision was. And there were some staff that didn't agree with that vision and they left willingly. And there were others that were suddenly trying to undermine what we were trying to build. And so it took a lot of crucial conversations of just saying, this is what we're about. And eventually I did have to let go of 2 team members, but I noticed that every time I took that bold, decisive action of just being clear on my vision and following through with that, it hurt for a while to lose a team member or to have to let go of a team member, but we were always able to find someone that came in that did believe in that vision, to the point today where we've got a team where things are gelling pretty well and we're all on board, and not only our numbers show that, but our overall happiness as a team and my ability to come in with a lot of energy has greatly improved over the 2.5 years. So that's kind of, a long answer for you, but that's the background a little bit.
That's great. And that's exactly kind of what we wanted to hear. And I will, one question about kind of the anatomy of this practice. So you bought into 2 practices.
Right.
Are they both single doctor practices, or what's the situation there?
So the other practice has 2 doctors, my friend's practice, and my practice is myself, and the owner doc is still an owner, a part owner, and he works several times a week, and he's going to transition out over the next little while.
Okay, so you've got a couple partners. You've got a partner at the other practice, partner at this practice. You're there, he's there, which also sometimes makes the leadership transition hard when, the older, the person who used to lead and make all the decisions is still there, and people are looking at you, they're looking at them. Was there any friction there with that transition between you being there, him being there, and how to have clear direction for the team?
Oh, for sure. There definitely was. And I would say one thing about my partner in my practice is he has been very good about being very hands-off. And cool. And that's been really nice. I think as we were undergoing that change, it was very hard on him. And to his credit, he reflected back on his transition where he also lost a lot of staff. or team members. And so I think while it was hard on him and we had some discussions, he really was hands off, and still to this day is very, very hands off, which has been nice because it's been able to be a smooth transition. And it's also helped us not have quite as large of a patient turnover. Because a lot of times when you buy a practice and the seller just leaves, you have some natural turnover. And our numbers just really haven't shown that large of a transition.
That's great. That's fantastic. And then with the transition, with losing team members, which is painful, was there any like really low moments where you're like, man, I should have just stayed in the Army, I shouldn't have bought, like what was kind of the deepest moment of doubt for you amongst all this?
Oh, for sure. I think those first 8 months of where I had taken over and I was now the leader, maybe every other day I would think, should I have gone back in the Army? But yeah. You mentioned a low point. There actually was. We were on vacation and we had gotten our house broken into.
Oh.
And it was at that moment where I sat back and I thought, I think that I'm going to get back in the Army.
Okay.
And I started calling people, started calling recruiters, started calling my Army contacts. And I just started to really, and this might be a little too religious, but I am a religious person. So I started to pray and really ask God, what do you want me to do? And I just had this feeling of, you need to stick it out. And so I did. I stuck it out. I didn't go through the process of getting back in. And I'm glad that I did that, because a lot changed at that point. And that was really where I focused on my own clarity and what I wanted. And it's still a process. I don't want to say that I'm always 100% clear and always 100% doing what I believe is my mission and purpose, but I definitely have a lot of routines and activities now that help me get there, which would probably have never happened had that low point in event not occurred. It was that crucial moment where I realized, if I'm going to do this, I need to put things in my life and do things in my life that are going to help me to be the best leader I can be, and also to continue to create a great practice.
No, and sometimes those extremely painful times, stuff comes from that you can't get in just the easy times, or if the transition had just gone swimmingly and it was all easy and your team members just supported everything you said. You wouldn't have been forced to develop, your vision of what you were doing and what you really wanted, and getting clear about all of that. So those, in the moment, those times just feel awful, just awful. But looking back, it sounds like you now have some perspective on that and can see the results of that time for you.
Definitely. It made dealing with coronavirus way, way better.
and let me add that dealing with the anxiety of being a business owner, and I know that I moved from the Midwest in Indiana up to Canada, and I didn't buy a business. I started a business from scratch when I had my son, Richard, going to college here and having to support him, and I literally was driving into my office or into doing some workshops, almost having panic attacks, anxiety attacks. So being able to manage your anxiety and your panic, and that the uncertainty is a huge part of leadership. And the fact that you had something to turn to, religion, meditation. I had a couple of songs that I would, whenever I felt the anxiety would come, I would play these songs. And I could just feel the anxiety go away. And the songs did also happen to be religious. But but you need to have an out of some kind when you have that type of anxiety. Otherwise, it'll eat you up, right? I don't care who you are. There's no practice that isn't stressful at some point in time. COVID-19 being obviously the most recent example of that, but it's not easy, right?
No, it's not.
I'm glad you clarified religious songs. I was thinking like "Mad World" by Tears for Fears is what you were playing. I don't know if that would help.
That one too.
Yeah.
That would have done. That probably would have helped too, actually.
Yeah. Well, so now I want to come to this decision to say, okay, I'm going to do a 360 review. I'm going to get clear. I'm going to get feedback, and coming up with that process for you. So you reached out, you emailed us, and you said, "Hey, I want to develop these questions." So let's talk about that. What were you hoping to get out of a 360 review, and how are you thinking? Like what was? Let's talk about a little bit the nitty gritty, like how the format of like how you wanted to do this, how you wanted to roll it out to your team, and all of that. What did you picture, and then we gave some feedback. Murray gave some feedback, and how that changed it a little bit. So start with you, Dr. Jack.
Right. So like you said, I reached out to you because I listened to the 360-degree survey episode, and I thought, this is it. This is what we need to do, because I felt we were at a point as a leadership team, and our leadership team is me, my office manager, my lead assistant. I felt we were at a point where there wasn't anything maybe that was very tangible for me, but I had the sense of there's more that we can be doing to develop our culture, to develop greater safety for teammates within the office, to know how we can improve as an office as a whole. And I thought, kind of like we talked about earlier in this conversation, I thought I'm never going to get that by just check-ins. Even though I do them quite frequently, it's just never going to happen unless it's something anonymous. And so that's when I reached out to you, and I also went back to listen to the episode. So I started a Google Doc of just, this is what I think I want to ask. And then Murray, thanks a lot. You added some further questions and also tweaked some things. And so I rolled this out at a team meeting, and I said, look, I created this SurveyMonkey survey. It's going to be able to help us to know where we're at as an office, as a team, and where we as your leaders in the office can help you. And so it took about a month to get everybody to do it, some gentle prompting throughout the process, but we eventually got everybody to do it. And it was what, again, hindsight's always 20/20, and I have the ability to have perspective now, and so I don't have those feelings that I originally had when I first saw the survey, but it's been everything that I've wanted it to be. It's given me ideas of what we need to do as a leadership team or as an office as a whole to have a greater patient experience, to have a better team experience, and for our culture to be just overall better.
Okay, cool. This is exciting. Let's get into some nuts and bolts.
Yeah, I do. So what I liked about your survey, Dr. Jack, here was that it was very short, right? There were 7 quantitative questions where you answered, strongly disagree to agree on 7 questions, and then 2 open-ended questions. The survey was designed to be done in 10 minutes, right? This was not, I worked in an organization where we did a 200 question survey, right? So this was meant to be, so this was about as light as you could go in terms of a survey. But what I'm hearing you describe is the data is almost as rich as any survey I've ever, I looked at, I've reviewed the data. There's some really rich data, even though this was not a super intensive experience for all the people in your practice and in your office.
Definitely.
Perfect.
And I think if you look back, when I look on SurveyMonkey, I think if you look back, it really only took them about 10 minutes. You can see how long it took them to do the survey, I believe. And it really, like you said, it was a very simple process. And so it wasn't drudgery where they were going through 200 questions. And at question 50, they thought, this is dumb, I'm just going to stop. So they were able to go through everything. And that definitely, the brevity helped everybody to get.
Are you guys okay if we go over the questions right now, just so people who are listening kind of have an idea of what was asked? Okay, so these first questions are the quantitative ones that have strongly disagree, neither agree or disagree, all the way up to strongly agree. And then it gives you some data with a total weighted average. So the first one was, our office is a better place to work compared to 1 year ago. So today, our office is a better place to work than it was a year ago. The office leadership team communicates well about changes affecting our office. So evaluating the communication there. Patients are having a better experience compared to 1 year ago. We have great teamwork and collaboration in this office. This office runs smoothly and efficiently. And we always know exactly what to do to best serve patients and help the practice succeed. So, Murray, talk to us about your thoughts on kind of the general broad thing that each question asks, and if there's any subtlety or nuance to the way that these questions are asked that's significant.
Well, I always think about the practice first, the business that you're running, the dental practice, and then I think about your patients, and then I think about your team. So I always want to have kind of questions that address those three areas. Surveys need to be, they need to get into all of those pieces. By the way, you forgot the last question? Or
the last question here that I missed was, Dr. Jack leads our team well.
So it's about the people. And then I'm going to add one other thing. I've worked in businesses and organizations and leadership for decades. No matter what business I'm in, everyone's always trying to do better year after year. They're trying to serve patients better. They're trying to make more money because they're becoming more effective and more efficient. And we're always asking people to do more with less. And I'm actually okay with that, because what happens is every other dental practice is doing that too. And if you don't do it well, then someone could come in and set up shop next door to you. And if your practice is a crappy practice, you're going to lose everyone. So if you want to create immunity to, a strength in your business, you always have to be improving and getting better. And your staff needs to understand that we need to be serving patients better. We need to be, being more effective and more efficient. They don't care so much about the profitability, and we need to be a happier place. And that's a continue. If that ever stops, then you're in danger of a competitor coming in and taking over. So those are kind of the basic concepts.
Multiple of those questions had compared to a year ago. So that's that piece of, are we getting better in these areas? And then, you covered leadership, communication, collaboration, efficiency, knowing what is expected and what needs to be done. So, standards of having clear expectations in place, and then just the overall feel. So that's some quantitative data. And then there's some qualitative kind of free response questions that were also included. So these are free form that people can answer in any way, short, long, that they want to. So the first one was, list one or two things that our office does well. Then we've got, list one or two things our office could improve on to provide a better patient or team member experience. And that's it. 2 qualitative, open-ended questions, 7 quantitative questions. So like we were saying, a very reasonable, short survey. You're not having to reinvent the wheel. And any one of our listeners could take those and plug this into SurveyMonkey, and boom, you've got a very powerful tool to inflict your own ego and allow some growth to occur. Let's go into some results. Dr. Jack, what stood out to you when you got these results back?
Right. So I think some of the things that really popped out to me was just our lower score in the office leadership team communicates well about changes affecting our office. I think that that's definitely something I perceived we were doing well, but definitely after the data, I realized that there are things that we can do better, and things that as a leadership team we can talk about on how we can do that. And I still haven't really been able to take the data and apply it into meetings and in talks with my leadership team, because right as we were getting these results, the coronavirus, COVID-19 hit, and our focus had to be elsewhere. But we're getting to a place of semi-normalcy now where I can start to really hone in on some of these. So that was one thing that stuck out. The other thing that stuck out to me was that a lot of people were pretty neutral on patients having a better experience compared to a year ago. And I guess for me, as I look back at what we've been talking about, improve our patient experience. We did that about a year ago, and we had someone come in that talked about, okay, what are you doing for the patient experience? And we talked about certain things that we could be doing. But since then, we haven't really had another focused team meeting discussion on, okay, this is what we said we were going to do. Are we doing it? And I just know in the back of my mind right now, one of the things that my office manager and I talked about are back to front transitions, especially with all of the different protocols that we've brought in with COVID-19. There's definitely a disconnect as people are going from back to front. And I think on a patient experience level, from the time they enter in till the time they leave, we want them to have this great experience with good flow. And just with some of the changes that we've had to make COVID-wise, we haven't, that back to front as they're leaving transition, it isn't there. And so anyway, that's another thing I noticed, is that we really haven't spent a lot of team meetings focusing on patient experience. And I think the data for me with a lot of people being neutral is something that indicates to me that we need to talk about this a little more.
That's great. And it's interesting. The one that had the communication one, that was the only one that you had 2 disagrees on that one. And then on the patient having a better experience, you had 5 neutrals. And so those, you see some of these patterns and you're like, oh, okay. No one said strongly disagree on anything, but you had a few disagrees here. And then that question wasn't interesting, that it's not disagree, but just half neutral, half maybe agree that it's better.
So I would recommend just realizing that this is a tool to help you to be better. It's not a reflection on yourself. And I would actually make one suggestion looking back, is that last question of Dr. Jack leads our team well, I feel is maybe skewed a little bit because they knew I was going to look at
leading
it,
question,
and so they didn't want to make me feel bad. So when I do this again a year from now, I'm actually going to take out that question personally, because I don't believe that truly might reflect the reality. It might, but it also might not, because they know I'm looking at that. And so I don't know, Murray, what are your thoughts? I felt that it might have been a little skewed.
Well, what we're not trying to do is, we're not trying to just look for kudos here. I mean, the fact that you have constant check-ins and that you're trying to communicate and trying to do things with your team, I mean, that was a very high score. What I noticed when so the overall answer is, what you need to do now is compare that moving forward. You do this once a year now, and now you've got so if that score goes up or down, and by the way, I took all the scores and I translated them to percentages to give you a percentage grade. Are you aware you can do that? SurveyMonkey doesn't do that for you. But you were at an 86% on that question. Whereas the communication question, you're at 61%. So there's a 25% differentiation. Whereas, you only had 4 different scores of the 7 questions. You were either at 61, 73, 80, or 86. So that data point in and of itself isn't significant, except that you ask that question again, and you get a sense of where things are going. The other thing is you glossed over all the good things. Like you had over 80% on the questions that said, we have a great teamwork and collaboration in this office. This office runs smoothly and efficiently, right? So you've got on those 2 questions, you have 80% and you've got 86% on your own leadership. So obviously that's why you don't look at always the positives, but it's good to know that. And then you need to compare that then moving forward. So having this baseline, you now can kind of say, are we getting better or getting worse? And so so as I work with leaders, what happens after a while is oftentimes leaders get complacent. And I can't tell you the number of times I've worked with leaders who they get their feedback and they said, I did this when I was a young leader or young dentist or young practice owner. I did these things and I don't do them anymore. Right. So it's not a bad idea. Again, you're not looking at the absolute score for that question, but you do want to figure out, how are they feeling about
the trends and the it's also really good that there was no disagree or strongly disagree, but the spread between neutral, agree, strongly agree might shift, and that might be a subtle shift, but it might reflect just overall trends.
I wouldn't take it out, given that you've got the baseline data.
No, that's just saying that's great, because I never thought about looking forward in the future and wanting to compare. That's perfect.
Any other thoughts for people interpreting this half of the survey? So either specific feedback for Dr. Jack or generalized information that people can gather from this quantitative side.
Yeah, I do think it is important for people in your office to understand that you are trying to make this a better place to work, and you are trying to get this better patient experience, and that the reason you're doing this is because you don't ever want a competitor to be able to come in and put or to steal patients away from you or put an office next to you. We're human beings. We can step back and we can look at what's going on, and we can make changes and adjustments in ways that others can't. And so the tendency oftentimes is just to kind of go with the status quo, but the status quo leads to decline. And so there's a teaching opportunity with the data around these 1-year comparisons that you can use with your as you feedback the data.
Let's move to the second half. This is the qualitative data. Let's start with the positive one. Was there anything that stood out to you, Dr. Jack, on list 1 or 2 things that our office does well?
One of the things that I always knew is that we had a great team that tried to help each other out, where if the hygienists were running behind, the assistants always tried to be aware and make sure that they were helping them. I always knew that as an office as a whole, everybody was keenly aware of what was going on and trying to help each other out. And so that's one thing that I really took away from it, was there was a lot of appreciating others' hard work and appreciating how team members would come in and help.
Some days things are going well, and some days chaos just shows up at your front doorstep, and being able to hold it together through those days is a strength.
The positive team vibe, the positive overall vibe of the office, the caring about patients, these written comments are really stellar. These are outstanding. I would want to go to your practice based on these things your office does well. And I was also impressed by people saying, other people are happy to jump in and help. It's surrounded by, there's not a union mentality, not my job, kind of just putting in time, kind of 8 to 5. It really feels like people are owning and caring the patient experience, working with each other. I mean, this is, you ought to be proud and feel pretty comfortable.
And I do. I really appreciate just we do. Every single team member that comes in, and even our new ones that we hire from time to time, realize that that's the expectation. And that has taken literally 2.5 years to evolve. And it wasn't that way at first. That it was a lot of hard conversations with each other of saying, hey, when I run behind, this is what's going on, and we would like some help. And also on the assistant end, them being willing to say, okay, you're right. Because the assistants are always willing to help. It's just realizing when those moments are, and it's been learning from each other, realizing that, hey, so-and-so's really stressed out right now, and let's go help that person. And so we have this system in our office called Blue Note, and you can just type in, I am running behind, Pam at the front office, can you let my next patient know I'm running behind? And then everyone sees that. And then maybe Sarah, our lead assistant, can go and say, hey, Mrs. Jones, come on back. I'm going to take your x-rays. Doctor will do the exam. And so that's been a 2.5, 3 year process of getting to that point. And it makes me feel good that there's still ways to improve, but that we're at that point where we're looking out for each other, and the office is running smoothly. So
didn't any of this good stuff make you feel good for a little while? Like, I'm just confused. No, I'm not confused.
Right. No, it does. And it's funny how, at least for me, it's human nature for me to always look at the negative and focus on that. Yes. That's definitely what I did when I first got this report back.
So we've covered the first qualitative question. Now let's go to this second question. List 1 or 2 things our office could improve on to provide a better patient or team member experience. I'm guessing that this was the painful question, but I want to turn it over to you, Dr. Jack. What stood out to you? What was the biggest gut punch here to hear from team members?
I think the biggest gut punch was, there's one that talks about our leadership team does not practice confidentiality. That was a big gut punch, because that's really important to me, that if team members come to us, that it's a safe place. That was the one that really stuck out to me.
In that comment, it says, I feel disrespected and not a valued or a wanted asset. Oh. I can imagine that, just feeling devastated reading that.
That led to that 3-day, oh my goodness, I'm a horrible leader, what's going on? The second is, I thought that we had good communication from top down. I've realized we don't, that there are things that we need to work on as an office, and as a leadership team, that we need to just do better at communicating to the group as a whole. So it's not, Sarah and Crystal know what's going on, the leads, and then nobody else in the office knows until either of those two tell them one by one by one. I'm still in the process of trying to figure out, okay, what is our best way once we as a leadership team decide, okay, this is what we're going to do for whatever the topic we might be talking about is. How does that then get distributed to the team so no one feels left out? And my original thought was just, we do it at meetings or during a morning huddle. That's something that, again, a hard and crucial conversation that needs to be had with the leadership team. And if it's not met, me, myself, as the owner, I need to go in there and really talk with that individual and say, this is why we've decided on this, and we need to keep doing it this way.
Have you thought about delegating some of the communication decisions you make to some of your leads? So literally saying, here are the types of things I should be communicating about. But when you make those decisions in your practice meetings, that at the end you say, okay, who is going to communicate this and when is it going to happen? Taking the next step around those decisions. Because sometimes it's so hard to make the decision. You think, whew, glad we made the decision. Let's move on. We don't take the time to say, okay, who is now going to be in charge of communicating to people and when is the date responsible? Is that something you've been doing, or would that help as you move forward here?
It would definitely help. And I think in some ways we were doing that a little bit, but not nearly as frequently. I was taking a majority of what needed to be said. And so that is a great idea, because I noticed that when I delegate it to one of the leads, it gets done. And I think a lot of times, sometimes I just forget. We make a decision and not that it's not important, but I just have another thing that comes up in my mind. And so that particular thing that I was going to communicate, maybe instead of being tomorrow morning, it's a few mornings later. And I think as I'm planning my day the night before, I'm like, oh, I forgot to do that. So I agree with you. I think that would help us out a lot in the times that we do it, just where I do say, hey, Sarah, why don't you push this out there? It gets done a lot faster than if I myself did it.
That's a really specific implementation of that can produce some accountability, direction, and directness, which is really hard, because I think that's the hardest thing is sometimes you have these conversations, decisions are made, and then I've had this even where like another doctor was like, oh, this is the first time hearing about that. It's like people hear about it from the wrong channels 2 days later, and that's where they feel like, oh, what the heck? I thought I would be, I'd be in the loop on that, or I thought I'd be part of that decision, or that I would have heard about that before now. And then, and if it happens more than once, and this is me speaking personally, that I know this is happening for me, people can genuinely feel hurt or disrespected like this, and it can be a problem. Go ahead.
Principle behind that, there's two principles. One is you want to share leadership, and the more you share leadership, the stronger your office becomes, right? The stronger your practice becomes. But the second one is really having a deadline. So saying, okay, this decision we made, you're going to take care of it. Will it be done by lunch, or be done by the end of the day, or done by, so just creating that little extra level of accountability and sharing that leadership can the little tiny, as I look at your data in your office, it seems like these are little small things, but these little small things can add up and make a big difference, right?
Definitely.
Would it make sense to have like a way that you push out communication from a meeting, like whether it's via text or an email, or here are the things that came out of this meeting to the whole team? It's weird because it's like such a small team that tends to be very on the go. People aren't on their computers checking devices. Would it be helpful to have some sort of formalized landing place for meetings or decision making? What do you think, Murray?
Well, what I would think is, after you then communicated it verbally, it's not a bad idea to have a follow-up email. But if you initially communicated it with an email, or a text or something like that, then people are going to be checking their phones and their texts rather than dealing with patients, right? So I do think you do need to document your communications, but this is not a white-collar environment where people are sitting at their desks all day long checking emails, right? It's a practice. It's a dental practice where you're doing things. So I would encourage you to have a written communication as a follow-up, just to be clear, because even as you verbally communicate to 4 or 5 different people are going to ask different questions, and the message might change a little bit. And at the end of the day, so you send it out and say, hey, any clarification or any other, that allows people to come back and say, yeah, actually, after I heard about this, I did have this question. So yeah, it's okay to do it, but not in the moment. But again, I'm not in a dental practice, but that would be my thought. Dr. Jack, what do you think?
Pushing out emails is a little not as effective in our office, whereas a group text would be something, like you said, at the end of the day, where whoever's in charge of putting out the information verbally can then come back and through the group text say, this is what we talked about today. What are some questions people have? It's just not as effective for whatever reason.
That's great. text is great.
It also is nice to kind of over communicate. Sometimes we feel like we've told people things, but they didn't hear it, or they were processing something else, or they were in the middle of something, or maybe like a little nuance of what needed to be communicated is lost, either left out, or a distraction came up. So kind of doubling down and figuring out a system to say, verbally push this out by a certain time, and then a group text on the back end. And some people are better auditory versus visual learners. My wife and I were having a conversation last night about the fact, she's like, you know what? I've realized I have a hard time processing information like auditory, like audiobooks, podcasts. It's okay. Christine doesn't listen to the show. It's totally fine. I'll move on. But having multiple modes of communication for team members might help them as well. Something else that came up, there was some clinical stuff that came up in these comments of overhangs or infection control. Was any of that a surprise to you?
So the infection control one wasn't, because I've got a hygienist who's great, and she is a major germaphobe, and so if we could have like a big plastic barrier around everything, she'd want to do that. She'd just like it to be a bubble of just infection-free area. But that one wasn't a surprise. And I love her, and she's brought in some great tips. But I think with her, it's really nice because it does make us up our game infection control wise. And so she's always bringing stuff like that up. And so unfortunately on that one, I knew exactly who had made that comment, and she laughed about it. She said, I bet you know who I was in the survey. And I said, I did. But I said, but keep it up, because we want to know. I think we have great infection control, but I think there's everywhere in every office where we could improve a little bit. And so, especially with COVID-19, it's great to have her, because she really just helps us be on our AA plus game, A plus plus, because she notices things and won't let it slide. And so that wasn't so much of a concern. And then, the overhangs, it's interesting, because for a while I was doing a different technique, and I was noticing that as far as the overhangs go, is I would clean everything up. It looked like things would be good. And then I would go back and see, like, man, on x-rays, I'd be like, man, I thought everything looked really good there. And I just decided to totally get rid of that particular technique that I was doing, with, it was the injection molding technique where you put some flowable and then some bulk fill in, and supposedly it was snowplow technique, I think is what they call it. So I just stopped doing that, and I noticed a lot of improvement from that. And so that was actually kind of interesting to see that, because I had noticed that maybe 2 or 3 months before this survey came out, and I actually changed to a different product and have been noticing a lot of improvement there. And so,
had they brought this up previously, or, so you had noticed it yourself, but had this come up in any previous conversations?
No, only when I'd go into hygiene, and they would mention, I always ask, hey, is there anything that you noticed? And they'd say, oh, it looks like there's an overhang on, number 19 mesial. And I'd look at the chart and be like, man, I just did that. And I'd check and I'd be like, where are you feeling it? And hygienists are great at pointing out. I mean, it's something about their tactile ability. And they're like, well, check on the mesial lingual, just, a little shy of the gum line. And I'm like, well, you're right, there it is. And so I noticed that in a given day, it might be coming up once, maybe twice, and where I'd look and say, man, we just did that. And so that was how it came up, not through anyone confronting me about it.
So to wrap us up here, you got some really specific feedback, some of it harder to stomach than others. And then to take all of this information, what else can we do with this? And maybe I'll defer to Murray here. What would you recommend to then do with all this data? Because you can just kind of keep it to yourself and hold it in and let it soak in and, humble you a little bit and then give you some drive to improve. But I think there's a little bit more we can do with this data.
Absolutely. Let me ask Dr. Jack, what have you done so far and what are you planning on doing? And then I'll comment on that. So yeah, let me know what you've done.
So the only thing that we've really been able to do so far is, as a leadership team, we've briefly glossed over some of these. And what I need, or what I want to do now, is go into a little bit more detail with my leadership. And then my thought is with the team, when we have a team meeting, what I would like to do is first acknowledge and apologize about the lack of communication and confidentiality, and ask them,
okay, so
what do you think,
Dr. Jack,
be doing better?
Taking this data,
that's
back
first, and then the second
team,
is just on the
what have you done so far? I know COVID hit right as you got these
just
results.
Going
and what do you
through
plan
our
to
patient
do with
experience,
this moving forward?
Dedicating a team meeting to that, saying, okay, let's go from front to back to the front. What does this whole process look like? And how are we doing at it? And what can be improved?
So those are your takeaways. Murray, would you add anything to that of, plans and how to phrase things, how to make sure that next time they have a survey that they're going to continue to be honest with their answers and feel good about the feedback that they shared? Anything that you would add there?
So starting with your leadership team, determining what you're going to do about it. And then a number of things I like about what you're doing is, number one, you're just going to pick two things. You decided to do one thing, which is communication, another thing, your patient experience. And I would tell them that you're going to work on that for the next year. You're going to resurvey a year from now, and we're going to compare the patient experience and compare communication scores. Because if you don't tell people you're working on things, you might improve things, but they may not notice them. And so you want to tell them. I would suggest when you go back to tell your team, number one, I would thank them for giving you the data for participating, which I think you mentioned. And then also I would say, hey, there was a couple of really, really good messages that came out of this. So I always try and summarize, what are some of the strengths or key positives, and then a couple of areas for improvement. And make sure you spend some time. What you don't want people to hear when you provide this survey feedback is that everything's wrong. You don't want them just to hear the negative messages. You want them to hear the positive. We've worked on our culture. So reinforce all the things you've done and all those positive things, all those positive comments and positive scores, so that they feel good about that and saying, hey, this is great. And just, acknowledge their effort and making your practice the way it is today, and then say, hey, and there's always a couple things we can work on. And I love the fact that you talked about communication. It came back in both the qualitative and quantitative scores, and you can mention that. And then the fact that you asked them, that's perfect. So the only thing, again, I would suggest is add in the positive stuff. So at the end of that meeting, when they get the survey feedback, they feel good about your practice in your office.
Absolutely. This has been fantastic. Dr. Jack, if you have any last encouraging words to people who are thinking about undergoing this process, what would you tell people? I would
just say, just do it. The time it takes to get this up and running is very minimal, but what you'll get out of it is just so great. And I'm really glad that I did this, and it has given me so much more information that I couldn't have gotten otherwise. And so I guess that would be my main message is just do it. It will help you to know where you can improve, not only for your patients, but for your team. And also it'll help you become a better leader. I would just do it. Don't hesitate. Well, thank you for sharing this process, for your candor and willingness to allow the Shared Practices audience learn as you're learning and seeing this in action, because it is a powerful tool. And thank you, Murray, for introducing this to the show and for providing a framework and a context to interpret these results and what to do with them. And I think we've given people
an amazing skill set moving forward. So thank you.
Oh, for sure.
Well, thanks for having me, and thanks for the help that you both gave me in getting this going. So I appreciate it.
That's a wrap. Thank you guys. Loved having everyone on. We'll talk with you next time. Take care.
Bye now.
Okay. I loved that. That was so much fun for me to get the perspective of people in the trenches dealing with not drama, but a lot of dental practice happiness centers around the team's ability to get along with each other. And a lot of times there's one specific thing, and sometimes it's a performance issue, sometimes it's an attitude issue and a behavior issue. And if we're afraid to address these things, if we don't have the skills to address these things, it festers and it gets worse. So this was a great interview to hear just one of these little nitty gritty issues and at the beginning of the call, at the beginning of the interview, I was honestly a little bit worried that we wouldn't convey, like, Anne didn't sound that bad at the beginning of the call. And I was like, they're really frustrated with this situation. We got to make sure that, we convey that. And eventually by, the middle of the interview, they'd conveyed why this was a problem and how this was permeating into the whole office. But a lot of times these problems that we have are a little squirrely, hard to put our finger on and say exactly what the problem is. So I just loved getting into that and then coming up with conversations and tools and ways we can say things and think about it. And I really wish them the best of luck. I really hope this goes well for them. So thank you all for listening. We will talk with you guys next week next time on the Shared Practices podcast.